But we begin with our big story, heightened concerns about Russia's influence here in the U.S. as House Republicans pursue their impeachment inquiry against President Biden and block critical aid to Ukraine.
What's your message for lawmakers today?
Mr. Biden, what do you hope to tell the committee today, sir?
Your brother-in-law did any of your business dealings?
That was President Biden's younger brother giving a closed-door deposition on the Hill today, telling House Republicans that the president had no involvement in his business dealings. It's all part of House Republicans' impeachment inquiry into the president over their unproven theory that he improperly supported and benefited from his family's overseas business affairs, including those of his son, Hunter. But there are new questions over the integrity of that inquiry. The Justice Department's special counsel leading a separate investigation into Hunter Biden has now charged a former FBI informant with lying and making up a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme involving President Biden, Hunter Biden, and a Ukrainian energy company. Those claims had been central to House Republicans' justification for the impeachment inquiry into the president. Prosecutors also now say that that former FBI informant has admitted to having contacts with people affiliated with Russian intelligence. It's all coming as the U.S. prepares new major sanctions against Russia in response to the death of Vladimir Putin's longtime political adversary, Alexei Navalny, after he spent years in a prison camp. Back here at home, former President Donald Trump, who's long praised Putin, is now comparing his own legal prosecution in the U.S. to Navalny's political persecution. This is all just days after Trump suggested that if he's elected again, he would allow Russia to invade America's NATO allies if they do not contribute and more to their own defense.
If we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want.
And meantime, on Capitol Hill, House Republicans have been loyal to the Trump. They are blocking bipartisan aid to Ukraine and providing more funding to the battlefield there as that country warns that dwindling supplies of weapons and ammunition are needed to fight Putin's invasion. Let's right away bring in ABC News contributor and former CIA field operative Daryl Blocker. Daryl, a lot to get here, but the undertone of this is that Russia is so heavily involved, not just obviously in its invasion of Ukraine, but in U.S. domestic politics too. So I just want to start off. Do you think that right now the U.S. is taking a strong enough stance to show a message of strength against Russia?
That's always a mixed bag, Elizabeth. They only recognize strength. Different people look at, our responses and say it was weak or it was over the top. But I believe the administration has been balanced. Viktor Suvorov, who is a KGB defector, or actually GRU defector, said that the Soviets were really adept at secrecy and disinformation. And disinformation is part of their history that goes back to the Cheka in World War I era. So they are very adept at this, and the United States is playing catch up.
Daryl, I want to get your take on how we are now knowing that this former FBI informant essentially had been influenced by Russia. Walk us through how this could have been vetted. What kind of process does this go through to get confidential sources like that? And what impact do you think it has that essentially now it turns out that his accusations have been lies?
So within the intelligence community, there's a process called zero trust architecture. Most people will trust whatever information already exists within their databases, already exists within their systems, but it might not be true. The CIA has a secret weapon that the FBI is only recently been using. Our collection management officers are responsible for vetting the information and vetting the source. So if you're not doing that constantly, if you just accept everything at face value, the end result is going to be something along the lines of what's happening right now.
And we've learned about this because of the special counsel already looking into this investigation to Hunter Biden. Just give us a sense of how frequently Russia is engaging in this type of disinformation here in the U.S., Daryl.
It is a constant bombardment every day, 24 hours a day. And I know that might sound like hyperbole, But when you're looking at on the cyber front, when you're looking at the fact that they don't physically have to be in a location and they can just sit at a keyboard on the other side of the world, the disinformation is constant. The disinformation has infiltrated U.S. media. It has has infiltrated the political parties. And once you drop that seed of doubt, once you drop that little, kernel of is this true or not, then the conspiracy theorists start to come out. But at the end of the day, this is something that Russia does all day, every day against the U.S. and others.
And something that they've done, we already have seen their impact on elections. How worried are you? We are in a presidential election here, Daryl.
It's absolutely troubling. But other countries have best practices where the Russians or the Soviets have done this to them in the past. We have the past 2 elections in 16 and 20 to look at to improve how we respond to things. But at the end of the day, until the American public is willing to stand up and tell Putin and recognize that a lot of this dissension that we feel that we have within our nation is caused by outsiders, and that we need to circle the wagons, and we can fight amongst ourselves, but we don't allow others to come in and make us fight, which is what's happening.
And Daryl, before we let you go, we do know that this week an American-Russian dual citizen, a ballerina from Los Angeles, was arrested in Russia. The Kremlin is citing treason, pointing to her support for Ukraine. What is the process to try to get her freed? We have seen a growing number of Americans detained in Russia, and it's incredibly difficult for them to get out.
I know that every dual national, every Russian citizen that's in the United States that has a green card feels that they know the system better than they do, that they're safe, but they are not. They can easily be a political pawn like this ballerina. $51 is not treason. I understand it was submitted on the day that Russia invaded, and maybe nothing since. So this is just a way for the Russians and Putin and his system to say, we're watching you around the world, we know who you are, and if you come into our territory, you're subject to our rules and our laws.
Very scary for her family and for others who are eager for any news. Daryl Blocker, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Let's bring the big story to our panel. Joining us today is ABC News contributor and SiriusXM radio host Mike Muse, former Republican Congresswoman from Virginia Barbara Comstock, Democratic strategist Alencia Johnson, and ABC News contributor and op-ed columnist for the Los Angeles Times, LZ Granderson. Thank you all so much for being here. Barbara, let's go to you first. I do think we need to talk more about what it says that former President Trump is now likening himself to Alexei Navalny. He's clearly refusing to condemn Vladimir Putin after Navalny's death. I mean, does this take Trump's likeness to Putin to a kind of a different level here this week?
Oh, it's obscene. And this was a concern back when I was in Congress, back in 2017 and 18, how Trump refused to say anything negative about a murderous dictator, about Vladimir Putin. And of course, Nikki Haley has now highlighted this, and it's very troublesome now that you have people trying to take this disinformation and try and use it in impeachment. So yes, it's a big problem. And, Trump needs to be called out for this. And I would hope that Joe Biden would seize on the Russian assets and use it for Ukraine.
Well, and we've seen, though, Republican lawmakers really, in many ways, siding with Trump, especially House lawmakers. Mike, what does it say to you that some of these Congress people who had been so hawkish on Russia are now, refusing to pass Ukraine aid and are still standing by former President Trump, given, his comments about Putin?
Yes, Elizabeth. I thought you and the conversation that you just had, Daryl, right now was extremely fascinating, and I thought it really set the groundwork for the conversation that we're having right now. I think, Elizabeth, we always talk about how America's national security is most vulnerable during the presidential transition time period. I actually think now that's even being extended to our campaign season when America's national security is most vulnerable, particularly as Russia recognizes now that our partisan is more divided than ever before. In particular, to your question, were Republicans seem more empathetic to Putin and to Russia by way of former President Trump. So as a result, they're using what they're experienced on, which is intelligence, to create disinformation. The irony here, Elizabeth, is that we've been so focused on misinformation and disinformation through AI and technology, but it goes right back to the fundamentals, which is just human assets. And Russia is the best at it, infiltrating through human assets to expose our vulnerabilities.
I want to ask you, Linsey, to follow up on what Mike is talking about there in this threat of disinformation. You know, we are in an election year. Is the Biden administration doing enough right now ahead of what is expected to be these ongoing threats from Russia, from Putin?
Listen, I think they have been conscious of the Russian interference in our elections for a while. Not just the Biden campaign, but the Democratic Party as a whole, and also people who may not be Democrats but are, you know, supportive of democracy and free and fair elections. And so the Biden administration, as well as the campaign, the two separate entities, are making sure that they're doing as much as possible, but also painting the contrast to the American people about the fact that you have one candidate, Donald Trump, who is cozying up with Russia and cozying up with a dictator, a violent dictator, in order to just continue to try to win. And so that contrast, while also trying to protect our elections, protect the United States from this misinformation, is a top priority for the campaign.
Well, and LZ, weigh in here, because we know it's a priority. We've heard warnings from the highest levels of government about Russia continuing to try to interfere in the democratic process. Do you think people at home are worried about this? Do you think that this threat of disinformation is on people's radar as they're using social media, as they're reading posts from people online?
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and that confusion really sort of started with Trump alienating people from the national press and from the free press. You know, that's one of the first moves that a dictator does, is try to destroy the media so that they're able to do what they need to do without their being held accountable. And so once you start having people question their source of information, it's easier to then confuse people with disinformation or misinformation. And so I look at this as sort of a long-term problem, beginning with his attack on the media. And now, obviously, we know about Putin's influence. We don't really know that much about what China has been doing, because we have been so focused in with Russia and Ukraine and the House Speaker and what's happening with funding. And so I'm concerned across the board about just us not being able to trust media, particularly news media, because of what Trump has done.
A conversation that will be continued in the months ahead. Mike, Barbara, Linsey, and LZ, stick with us. We got a lot more to come.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.